So, Kevin, welcome to what is actually the first episode of the SU podcast, which we're calling the Anomalous Review. Thanks for being willing to come here and talk late into the evening. I think it's 9 o'clock in both of our time zones. So, yeah, two night owls coming together to talk UFOs. What could be better?
If you're doing it at 3 a.m., that would be the best.
Yeah, well, I mean, we may go that
during
long.
the witching hour. That's when things happen.
It is, right? That's I think Jacques Kiel says that in one of his books. So, Kevin Knuth, you are a professor of physics at the University of Albany and the editor-in-chief of the journal Entropy. You're a former NASA research scientist. You worked at NASA Ames Research Center and the Intelligent Systems Division, designing artificial intelligence algorithms for astrophysical data analysis. Kevin, he is currently engaged in research interests, including the foundations of physics, quantum information, autonomous robotics, the search for and characterization of extrasolar planets, and unidentified aerial phenomena, which you've been doing for, I guess, about 6 years now. Is that right?
About 6 years, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. You've published over 100 peer-reviewed scientific publications. Coming from philosophy, that's just a staggering amount. I think like 5 for us is really good. You have over 100. You've been invited.
You guys write books. That's something that we don't do. That to me is intimidating.
And philosophy itself is just super catty, intimidating. Well, I'm not interviewing it. Well, I'm interviewing Mike Safoni. He's a philosopher, but he gets a special pass. But
plus, I've seen philosophers give talks, and they, I'm used to having slides or some kind of notes, but I've seen philosophers give talks right off the top of their head. Point 3B and they'll come out here. They'll have these all memorized, and I can't remember all of that.
That's sort of the expectation among. Well, we don't use data really. We don't have like charts and things to point to. If you do, it's hand-drawn comics or something. So
right.
And you've been invited to give over 100 presentations in 18 countries. So that is quite an interesting background you bring to this subject. So we said you've been studying UAP in some like sort of official capacity for about 8 years or 6 years now.
For about 6 years, yeah.
That's right. And I think I heard that your interest though started earlier when you were in undergrad. I think that there was a UAP sighting and maybe a cattle mutilation when you were an undergrad. Is that kind of what sparked?
Yeah, there was. So I've had my own sighting, which I didn't really take horribly seriously until more recently. This would have been in June of 1987 or so. It was while I was still an undergrad, and I was living in my hometown in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I was working as a computer programmer at Mercury Marine. They make outboard motors, and I was walking from work to my car, and I spotted an F-16 in the air, and I was excited by that. This was June, so Fond du Lac, Wisconsin is just south of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where they have the Experimental Aircraft Association fly-in annually in July. So I saw the F-16. I thought, wow, that's a month early, for F-16s to be in the air. So I ran to my car, and I'm a bird watcher, so I kept binoculars in my car. So I pulled out my pair of binoculars and looked and realized it was 2 F-16s, and they were coming in from the north, and they peeled off from one another. And I followed one of them, and it kind of swept around, and they ended up circling this metallic sphere that was just hovering in the sky. And at the time, I just thought it was a weather balloon, and I was witnessing some kind of exercise. I was far more interested in the F-16s than I was the metallic sphere. And then 2 more F-16s came in from the west. So they were coming from different air bases, and they circled as well. So I watched for a little over 3 minutes. I watched through binoculars, watched these 4 F-16s buzzing around this metallic sphere for about like angry bees. It was fascinating.
Wow.
And I took some size measurements with my thumb, measuring angular size, and I know the F-16s were about 125 feet long. So the metallic sphere was about 1/3 of the size of an F-16. So it was probably around 30, 40 feet across. So it was a big sphere. And I, at some point I thought, well, my brother has to see this, right? And I've got to share it with somebody. So we didn't have cell phones. This was back in 1987. So I hopped in my car and I drove home, which was maybe about a 5 to 10 minute drive. And by the time I got him out of the house to look, everything was gone. Right. Of course, the big mistake. So I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to
You
the
didn't get
sphere.
to see it
What
leave
happened
or
to
anything.
I didn't get to see anything leave.
Did you see it move, or did it just was
It just
stationary?
stayed in the same place. I mean, it was a still day. It was crystal clear, clear blue sky. It just stayed in the same place. Later on, I did some calculations and found that it was probably about 5,000 feet up.
Wow.
And then it wasn't until years later that I was talking to friends in the Air Force and mentioned that I witnessed this exercise once, and they pointed out that, well, it wouldn't be an exercise. They wouldn't have had an exercise over the city. And certainly you wouldn't fly an F-16 anywhere close to a weather balloon because you'd suck the thing into the air intake and bring the plane down.
Oh, interesting.
And that was those were all very good arguments. So but everybody I've ever spoken to have said, yeah, that wasn't an exercise. That was something serious. But you've
Your
got
explanation up to
two
that
groups
point.
of F-16s from two different air bases. It's very strange.
Oh, that is a good point. Yeah, it's because they come from two different directions.
Right. Yeah, two totally different directions. And yeah, so I in fact had been recently have been I was contacted by the FBI who wanted a professional that they could they've got to deal with UFO reports now.
Sure.
And so they wanted somebody to be able to talk to get to run cases by, which I agreed to do. And I told them this story. They asked if I'd ever seen anything. I told them that story. And so they asked if I'd ever reported, and I said, no, I've never reported it. And well, I never thought it was significant until recently. And so,
Did you have
so
any explanation in your head for what it was prior
I have
to?
no idea. I have no idea what it was. I mean, at the time I thought it would be a weather balloon and they were just flying around a weather balloon, but we now know that there are, metallic spheres
Sure.
all over the world, which Kirkpatrick himself said,
Yeah,
before he wrote
and
the
he's
Scientific
not
American article.
he's not one to give too much slack to the UFO subject. So the fact that he
That's
had,
right.
okay.
So this could very well be one of those metallic spheres. And I would love to be able to go back in time and spend more time focused on the sphere. I was busy with the planes buzzing around, and watching four F-16s buzz around like bees was pretty fascinating. And it was thinking back, I'm not sure how they did that without an accident. I mean, they were really pretty close to each other as well. So,
And they must have not thought it was a weather balloon either. I mean, I guess they have sort of
oh, I mean, yeah,
internal readings and
if
things.
it was a serious thing, then there was something serious going on. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, four planes flying like that in close quarters is already dangerous. So
Was this prior to the sort of UAP, I don't know, flap or sighting when you were in undergrad? I don't think you actually saw this one, but
yeah, no, the one that really made the big difference for me was actually my first week in graduate school. I
oh,
went
okay,
to
grad student.
so I grew up in Wisconsin, as I mentioned, and then I went to graduate school in Montana at Montana State in Bozeman, and so this would have been a year later. It would have been in the fall of 1988. So this is in early September of 1988. And our first or second week in school. So we had just moved there. I had just moved there. And there was one night there was a UFO, lots of UFO sightings in Bozeman in the area, and a cattle mutilation on one of the ranches in which two cows were killed. And it was all over the news, pretty freaky, and people were kind of freaked out about it.
Yeah.
Apparently, there were a lot of calls to the sheriff's office about UFOs, and so it was a pretty big deal. And we were discussing this in the physics department. The new graduate students were. I think we were all trying to get our heads around what kind of crazy place did we just move to, right? You're just starting graduate school. You're looking down the barrel of a PhD program, which lasts, 4 to 5 years. And so we've got to live in this place for 4 to 5 years. And this
Now there are
happens here?
cattle mutilations and things.
That's really bizarre. Yeah. And so it was a very heated discussion on the second floor of the physics building, and one of the professors was clearly disturbed. He came out of his office to find out what the commotion was and came down by us, and he wasn't very comforting. He goes, "Oh, well, yeah, this happens here from time to time, and there are often UFO sightings, and it gets investigated, and no one ever figures anything out, and then we all kind of forget about it until it happens again." And we were just like, "What? That's
Oh,
really a thing that happens?" And so it was really pretty strange. And he finished with that, and then he added, he said, "But you know what's really strange?" He said, "I have friends who are in the Air Force up at the Air Force Base in Malmstrom Air Force Base in northern Montana, and they have problems there with UFOs flying over the nuclear weapon sites and shutting down our ICBMs."
he was telling you this in '88.
He told us this in September of '88. He told me this, and I was and we listened politely. And when he walked away, I'll be honest, we laughed our asses off because it
Yeah,
really,
it sounds so.
UFOs are shutting down our nuclear missiles, and we're not on high alert, or nobody's doing anything about it, and it just sounded so implausible. And so that became kind of a running joke that year for us graduate students. Whenever somebody said, had a weird story, something weird happened to me today, and they would tell their story, but somebody else would chime in, "But it's really weird. UFOs are shutting down nuclear weapons up in Malmstrom Air Force Base," and we all would laugh.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a running joke. And for that reason, it stuck with me. It's a funny thing I heard in graduate school. And then years later, when I was here in Albany teaching at the University of Albany, I was teaching an astronomy course. And I had a couple of lectures on astrobiology.
Hmm.
And some of the students wanted me to touch on the topic of what is the possibility of there being intelligent alien life, and could they visit Earth, and could you talk about that a little bit in class? And I was just poking around on the internet thinking, I'm not sure what to talk about other than the Drake equation
Yeah.
and the Fermi paradox. And, what can I really talk about in class? And I stumbled on, so this would have been about 2015.
So
And I
before
stumbled
the New
on,
York Times videos and
it was before,
articles.
before the New York Times, just 2 years before. But I stumbled on the press conference that Robert Hastings held in 2010. And in that press conference, he had Robert Salas and maybe 5 or 6 others speak. Salas was at Malmstrom Air Force Base,
Yeah,
the
he
same
was.
Air Force Base. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I heard about this 30 years ago, right? From a physics professor, right? So it wasn't like I read this in the Weekly World News or something. This I had heard from a physics professor. And now here, this person from Malmstrom Air Force Base was saying this actually happened. And I remember I was already up quite late, and we were joking about being night owls earlier, but I was up quite late, and I watched the whole press conference because I was fascinated by this,
Yeah.
and when I was done, I thought, oh my God, this is real. This has to be real. These people all are telling their stories about what happened. I heard about this, um, and it's real, but nobody's paying attention because no one believes it, and that's dangerous. I just thought this is a dangerous situation, and at that time, at that moment, I thought somebody needs to be paying attention, and I decided to start paying attention, which was what made the big difference, right?
I'm
Um,
glad you did. Did you pay attention mostly out of I mean, you talk about it seeming dangerous, but was it mostly out of
well, it was mostly
concern for?
scientific curiosity. I mean, if this is real, what's actually going on? I mean, how do you explain this? And I and I didn't know what to present to my students the next day, so I showed them part of that interview,
What was their reaction?
and they were terrified. I felt so horrible doing it. I showed portions of this, and then I stopped it, and I was about to say, "Isn't that interesting?" And they were all just looking at the screen, mortified. And I thought, "Whoa, crap, that was not cool." I certainly did not think this through. And so and so then we had some bit of talking of, they were like, "Is this real? I mean, what do you?" And so we had some discussion about that in class, and I tried to do some damage control. But
At that point, you didn't. I mean, you didn't really know a ton about the subject then, right? I mean,
I
what do you
didn't know much
study
about the
then?
subject at all, except that what you see on television, I saw growing up on In Search of with Leonard Nimoy in the
Yeah.
70s, and that's about all I knew about the topic. And
How did you go
so
about learning more? So you had that encounter in it, and you said you wanted to start paying attention. But how did you go about sifting through the nonsense and actually learning about a subject?
well, that's the hardest part is the nonsense. There's so much nonsense to sift through. And as a scientist, it would be, I mean, had I not been motivated, I would have been pretty turned off by it pretty quickly. And so I can understand why a lot of scientists will entertain this for a little bit and say, "Oh, this is too much," and walk away. I can see why that happens because the nonsense, as we would say, the signal to noise ratio is really low.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I did some things well. I found interviews with some reputable people that I listened to on
Okay.
YouTube. I remember Gordon Cooper's interviews with his encounters. I found very interesting. Gordon Cooper being an astronaut, and he had encounters when he was a fighter pilot in 1951, and then later encountered a disc while he was in charge of filming a test plane in um, where is it, on a dry lake bed in California where they were doing testing. They were filming this and they were getting ready to film a test of an experimental plane, and a saucer flew over the field and landed some distance away. And the film team ran out toward the saucer and actually filmed it. Um, and so I saw interviews of that, and I thought, well, this is Gordon Cooper. I mean, he's a national hero. He's a national hero. He's an astronaut. He's not a silly person at all. So I found that was interesting. And then I then found some books to read that I found were helpful. Hill's book about he's former NASA, who's about the physics of UFOs,
I don't know
and
this book. What is it? Which book?
by Hill, it's on the physics of UFOs, and so
We'll put it in the show notes.
put it in the show notes. Yeah, there we go. And
You may mostly read sort of the physics angle.
yeah, oh, unconventional flying objects, a scientific analysis. Yeah, so that's by Paul Hill. So I had got that book and was reading that, which I found to be useful, because he's a former NASA physicist looking at the topic. And then Leslie Kane had a book on, UFOs and
UFOs,
government.
generals,
That
and
was
yeah.
very good. And so that's pretty much how I um got to be educated on the topic, and found that, and it's difficult to sort through, it's difficult to tell what's nonsense and what's not, right? That's the other part that's hard, because you're dealing with a topic that's already anomalous. The phenomena you're dealing with are anomalous, and it's hard to tell what's silly. I think that I ended up basically just politely entertain everything and then try to sort through it later. And
Okay.
I think that I found to be very helpful. And
I
you
have.
still encounter this when you talk to even in the UFO community. You talked about the whole abduction phenomenon. The abduction phenomenon is a difficult one. It's very weird, admittedly, and it at times is hard to believe. But is it all nonsense? So that's not clear. And I
Not at
think
all.
you
I
need
mean, I
to.
I occasionally find myself half an hour into a conversation with a person who I have think is totally reasonable and sane and educated, and then they'll say something like, well, the the Greys are very angry people or something, and you're like, oh, well, we have.
Oh, wait a minute. What? I didn't. I've never heard they're angry. That's okay.
I
That's
don't know if
weird.
that's exactly what they'll say, but they say something like that, and you think, okay, so I have
Yeah.
I don't know if I failed to sift the nonsense out, or if this person I'm talking to has, but somehow it gets scrambled into the mix, and then you have to, even through conversations with people who otherwise know what they're talking about.
And I find that really that what seems to be the case is there seems to be an element of truth to a lot of this. It's not all nonsense, but it requires it requires a lot of sorting through things and thinking about things carefully.
So I have a theory about this, and feel free to disagree vigorously if you
All right,
want to.
sure.
But I have the theory that that the the low signal to noise ratio in the UFO world is something of a misperception, because if you look at, like, if you go look at all the YouTube videos on any other topic like history or philosophy or medicine or something, I find there's a lot of like really wild speculation in there too, and a lot of misinformation and people who don't know what they're talking about, or who are just kind of like, you know, yeah, speculating. But the difference between the UFO subject and those is that those subjects have been organized and professionalized into like disciplines. So we know, if we want the sort of like orthodox or like consensus ideas of those disciplines, we know which presses to get books from. We know which university departments hire people who work on it. There's, awards for excellence in teaching or research for those things. We know who is a biologist or a medical doctor, but it's much harder to know who is an expert on UFOs or what presses to get the books from. So I think that to some degree that has to be part of the problem. There really is good, high quality information out there, but it's just all kind of smeared together with all the rest without these organizational, cues to tell us where to find it. That's got to be part of the problem, at least, but it certainly isn't the whole problem. So, does that sound sort of right to you? And if so, how do we move towards like a more rigorous, well-defined discipline of UAP studies?
Oh, there's several questions there, right?
I like to pack them all into one and just see what.
Yeah, put them all into one big thing. Hmm. No, I think to some degree that's your assessment is right. I think that what's lacking is we lack a generally agreed upon truth, right? And that's what the other disciplines tend to do. They tend to settle down into some generally agreed upon truth.
Some
And there are
consensus.
fringe aspects to the other disciplines as well. Um, but those are rather well contained or kept out, whichever way you want to think about it. And I think that's maybe the difficulty.
So how do we
And
get it to settle down? How do we get like, is it that we need like some consensus view to emerge, or we just need
you
people in
almost
state
need some
authority?
kind of consensus view to emerge. I think that's probably what's needed, but at the same time, you don't want to do that too early until the topic's really well understood. And this is a very complicated topic because it involves a number of phenomena rather than just lights in the sky. And um, and I think that you have I'm a physicist, so I'm focused on I've been I've been able to focus on some aspects of the phenomenon, such as how fast is this thing moving, right? How fast does it accelerate? Can we calculate this? How much energy is involved? How bright are the lights? How luminous are they, right? Um, what are the temperatures of these objects? I mean, these are the boring physics questions
Not boring at all to
that,
me, at least to me.
that
This
right. Yeah, it's an unknown phenomenon, so they're not quite boring, but they're usually rather dry and mechanical. I, to call this the nuts and bolts of UFO studies. But that's only one aspect of this. You have if you have a landing and you have chemical traces, now you need to involve chemists. Chemists are useful, biologists are useful. in understanding the effects of UFOs on people. There are physical effects on people. People have been burnt and have had problems with cancer and things like this. So because you have radiation from these things, so you have that to worry about. You also have psychological effects on people and sociological effects on people, and these are significant too. People do not always think to take photographs when these things happen.
Yeah, I
Um,
find that fascinating. The number
that's
of people who
that is very common, and it's often true when there's an extraordinary event happening. You almost are stuck with a choice. I can watch the event, or I can
record
go
it.
tell somebody, or I can take a photograph. You don't have many choices. Just like the rat's nest of 4 F-16s in a sphere that I saw. I can watch the event, which I did for 3 minutes, but I want to show somebody, and then I gotta leave and go show somebody. Um, and if I would have had a camera, then I could have chosen to take a picture. Um, and and I don't think it's entirely fair. People often say, "Well, there's 5 billion cell phones out there with cameras." Well, they're not the best cameras in the world.
Oh, they're made for selfies. I mean, that's what the
They're
camera
made for
is engineered
selfies.
to
They're
do.
made for selfies. They're not made for photographing something far away like that. And like I said, I'm a bird watcher, so sometimes I'm using especially when I'm in a foreign country, I'll use my cell phone to try to get a picture of a bird that I can't identify where
You just have
I don't
blurry
have my
spheres.
binoculars. So it's very hard to get pictures of a bird, with your camera. In fact, I did this recently. Maybe I can even display this.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, I saw some vultures the other day. I was up in Ticonderoga, New York for Ticonderoga Star Trek convention. And I
Oh,
saw some vultures that looked
you're a
like
Trekkie.
black vultures. And so that's the best photo I got of these vultures.
Yeah, they look like every
And
speck of.
is it a black vulture or a turkey vulture? I thought it looked a bit like a black vulture, which they're not common here in New York, and usually it would be a turkey vulture. So I took those photographs, and yeah, but it's hard to get a good photograph, and there I was trying, um, and but people often don't think about it, and then you have another strange phenomena that happens where people will forget that they saw the thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Very often you can ask people, have you ever seen a UFO? And they'll say no, I've never seen one. And then 20 minutes later, well, wait a minute, there was that one time, right? It's not in the front of their minds, it's somehow back. um so there's some sociological and psychological phenomena involved as well, and then we're not even getting into the weird stuff yet.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
and
With the religion
then,
or sort
then
of
there's the religious aspects.
high
There's
strangeness sort of
the
stuff.
high strangeness is when it really gets bizarre. And um and I'm even hesitant as a physicist to mention some of these things that get reported because they're really weird.
Why are you
And
hesitant? Is it that there are sort of professional consequences that you don't want to even skirt near, or is it that you don't want to muddy
well,
the
I think it's
conversation?
for me right now, I worry about it's the credibility issue. I'm a serious scientist. I'm doing work on exoplanets right now. We have a NASA funded grant to study exoplanets. I'm doing serious scientific work, and I'm also studying UFOs. And that gives credibility to, my credibility gives credibility to the
Yes.
topic,
You're lending
and
your
what we
credibility.
what we discover, and I would like to keep it that way. But if you start to talk about the really weird stuff that I'm not sure I believe in 100%, then people, other scientists will say, well, does he really believe in this? Because that's crazy. And then if he's crazy about that, then and so I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to talk about these things. And
It is, and I think there's a further problem of in the public's perception. I think there's this consistent question of why isn't this being studied more seriously by all the people who have the sort of expertise that we need to study it? Social psychologists and physicists and all the other disciplines, but nobody, I think, really feels like this is their area. Like when strange anomalous things happen, I don't know anybody who's like, that's, yeah, there was a strange light over, Tehran or something. My department is the department that studies that sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
you need to
Everybody,
call this guy or this
yeah,
person and have them come study this. Yeah.
who is that? And also, the public doesn't generally understand the degree to which, especially academics, are already like neck deep in a research project. Like, even if it is sort of their expertise that they could bring to it, they're already doing something. You can't just like
You're already
put down
you're
your
you're already working on 5 different projects already. And I've got right now I'm editing 5 papers that I've got to get edited by the end of July, for publication. 2 of them are in theoretical physics. One of them is on exoplanets. One is on our UAP work, and another one is my SEO paper, related to the SEO talk I'm going to give on anomalies in science. And so, yeah, you're neck deep in work already, and
so maybe we need more grants or something to at least make it
if
possible.
we had funding for these topics, then you would have people who like, yeah, this is what I do, and I would, yeah, that would make a difference. Um, as for who is the expert you can call, I think there are people I know who are experts in certain aspects, but this is all kind of kept on the down low, right? I mean, it's still kind of invisible college stuff where we do some of this in the background and we talk about some of these things in the background.
Yeah. I know
So
even for SCU, there a lot of our members are only their own identity is only known to the board because
yeah,
they just don't want to have to deal with whatever.
you don't want all the publicity and the difficulty that comes with that. That's right.
So I do want to talk about some of the work that you have done, the kind of nitty gritty things. Uh, one area of your work relevant to the UAP subject seems to be looking at empirical data we have from encounters or sightings and trying to kind of reverse engineer out of them some description of what this object must be like, how much energy it must be using. Like if we saw an object move and from this point to that point with such and such a speed, what can we determine about it? And some of the conclusions you've drawn from case studies are like pretty baffling, surprising, that the amounts of energy that would need to be used to accelerate or decelerate an object. Can you tell us maybe a few of those case studies and what you've concluded on the basis of them?
Oh, certainly, yeah. This is the thinking that went into this was that we hear about these cases, and it's clear from the anecdotes that this is what's going on is anomalous. But my question is, well, how anomalous is this really? I mean,
Mm.
how far off the scale are we talking? And so one of the easiest things to be able to calculate in some cases, when you have the right descriptions, or the person made the right observations, or if you have radar and in some cases video, you can maybe estimate speeds and accelerations to some degree,
Mhm.
which is the paper that I published with Robert Powell and Peter Reale from SCU. We looked at a few cases where we were able to estimate speeds and accelerations, and what you find is that these things are fast. They're, people say that they're fast. When Commander Fravor, said that he encountered the Tic Tac and it then sped off over his nose and disappeared in 2 seconds, he said it accelerated like it was shot out of a gun. Well, what's that acceleration like? I mean, how much is that really? And so, we were able to estimate, well, how long would it take for a 40-foot tic tac shaped object to, go from being at his nose to not being able to be seen.
So take us through
Um,
how you analyze that particular one. You had he described an object and he gave a estimate of its size. And as a fighter pilot, they have the skill of being able to look and get a
yeah, he has the
fairly
skill to
accurate.
do that. They
Uh,
weren't. Yeah, so he's a half mile away. You can still tell. You can tell about how far away he was. They were, the skeptics are all like, well, they have no idea how far away it was and all this. They were at 20,000 feet. The thing was at sea level. You were 20,000 feet away. It's super easy.
Sure.
And they know sizes of things from 20,000 feet. You're used to, they fly at 20,000 feet all the time. They know how big things look at 20,000 feet. It is not hard for somebody who's trained and does that as a career to tell you how big it is.
It can
I
at
can tell
least
you how big
specify a
birds
range, right?
are.
And you can use a
Sorry.
range. Like he can specify a range, and then you can use that range to
You can use that
say
range to
the
put
lower bound.
limits on things. Yeah.
So what if
And
he
then,
says he
and
says
then the next big question is always asked, how wrong could they be?
okay,
That's an important thing. Always know your error bars. Know how much error you could possibly have. So how wrong could they be? The pilot of the Japanese airline 1628 in 1988 over Anchorage, Alaska, when he's got a walnut-shaped craft the size of 3 747s. It says when it was in front of his plane, it filled the windscreen. Well, how wrong can you be? It's big.
yeah.
I mean, what more do you want? Okay, so it wasn't 3 747s in length. It was only 2.5 747s in length. I mean, right. But this is, yeah, so you want to be able to quantify things like that too. So how wrong could they be? And that's a big part of what I do is in my work in data analysis. I teach a course on Bayesian data analysis. I've taught it this will be my 19th year. And I tell my students, you aren't just estimating a number, you're estimating your error. You have to estimate both. It's meaningless unless you have the error. And so you can look at these cases and very, in the case of the Nimitz encounter, when Kevin Day was watching these things on radar, and they would drop from, was it 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds or something like this. What's the speed and acceleration of that? And that's really fast. You're going 28,000 feet. You're talking, what, 5 miles? You're going 5 miles in less than a second. You're going from rest to accelerating to a speed and then stopping again. And so the minimum acceleration, you can put a lower bound on it, has to be the acceleration where you accelerate at a constant rate to the midpoint, and then you decelerate at the same rate. And that acceleration comes out to be about 5,000 Gs. There's no getting around it. You can't, if it's 0.78 seconds, that's going to be 5,000 Gs.
And a human can withstand like a maximum of 10 Gs. Is that
about 10 Gs?
right?
Yeah, not much more than 10 Gs.
And our planes
But
can't
even our craft can't handle things like this. An F-35 fighter will have the wings ripped off at about 13 Gs. So our airplanes can't handle accelerations anywhere near that. Missiles are designed to handle higher accelerations. They can go up to about 60 Gs before the airframe starts to come apart and become compromised. So, but 5,000 Gs is way off the charts.
And that's the lower, that's the sort of least.
That was the lower bound. That
Yeah.
was the lower bound. It could have accelerated faster and then cruised down at a constant speed and then like decelerate faster. That's possible. We don't know. But so it's a lower bound, right?
So what does
And
it take
lower
to
bound gives
accelerate?
you a maximum speed of about 42,000 miles an hour.
What is
At the-
42,000 miles an hour? That's just off my ability to
Yeah,
even.
well, how fast is that? Well, that's the good question. The space shuttle or the space station goes about 17,000 miles an hour. So it's about 3 times faster than the space shuttle or space station. The New Horizons probe that we sent to Pluto is traveling about 45,000 miles an hour. So that Tic Tac accelerated in about a third of a second to the speed of the New Horizons probe, which we had to whip around Jupiter and Venus and all this garbage to get it off into at those speeds, right? We had to go through all these histrionics with this giant rocket, giant chemical rocket, and all this to do this. And this Tic Tac does it in 0.3 seconds. Clearly remarkable, clearly anomalous, clearly not human technology.
Yeah.
And I joke, people go, why does everybody always assume they're spaceships? And when you do the numbers, it's pretty simple because they move as fast as spaceships do.
So
It's pretty
they certainly
straightforward.
could be. They could get out of the Earth's gravity well. They could get off into space without any problem. So why
That
wouldn't
could get, yeah, that could easily, at that speed, it could easily get, leave the Earth. The accelerations are a whole different matter. 5,000 Gs is nothing to scoff at.
what
At
does
a
it take to
thousand Gs,
accelerate something that?
yeah, at 1,000 Gs, 1/5 of that, you can get to 90% the speed of light in 17 hours.
Oh wow.
So if that tic tac could, instead of going 5,000 Gs of acceleration, just handled 1,000 Gs and sustained that for 17 hours, you're up to 90% the speed of light. And at that speed, you can get across the galaxy in about 3 months. That's
Across the
relativity.
galaxy.
That's relativity. That's just physics. That's textbook physics.
So three
Nothing.
months for them, but
3 months for them,
yeah,
80,000 years for us. Right, right.
that's incredible. So we don't know the mass of the Tic Tac, obviously, but if you estimate some low, give it some very low estimate of what
That's
its
what we
mass
did in
might
the
be. I
paper. We gave it a low mass estimate. I forgot what the number we used, but we took
think it was like 20% of an
it was
F-18
about
or
the
something.
size, it's about the size of an F-18. So we took about 1/10 of the mass of an F-18. So we said it's about the same size of F-18. Let's take 1/10 of that, order, drop it an order of magnitude, and use that mass. And if you do that, you find out that that maneuver would have taken about 1,000 gigawatts of power.
What is that? What's 1,000 gigawatts of power?
1,000. Well, if you remember Back to the Future, Doc Brown was all excited. 2.8 gigawatts. That's only 2.8. This is about 1,000 gigawatts of power, right? So we're already well beyond what Back to the Future's time machine was using.
Yeah.
Um, just to give people some cultural scale.
Yeah.
But 1,000 gigawatts is well above the entire nuclear output of the United States.
So if we hooked up every nuclear
Every
reactor in
nuclear power
America
plant and put it into that thing, it still wouldn't be enough to make that maneuver
in the time that it took, yeah,
in the time that it took. Yeah. So it's, I mean, if Senior Chief's days observations were correct, then there's no way this is human technology.
and not
Yeah,
just if they were correct, if they were in the ballpark,
in the ballpark, yeah.
anywhere
If they're
near,
even in the ballpark, yeah.
it's
Those
some.
observations would have had to be way off. And it's hard to imagine that they could be that far off.
So an incredible amount of energy it would have taken to accelerate this object. Also, an incredible amount of energy it would have taken to break it, to
to
get it
break it.
that
Well,
energy.
yeah, and so for physicists, the question is, where did that energy go? Where did it come from, and where did it go? Right? Energy just doesn't come and go. It doesn't just disappear. So that energy should have been dissipated somehow. Usually, when we use things to dissipate energy,
Heat.
breaking,
Yeah.
say we dissipate it through heat. If that would have happened, then the amount of energy should have been about the same as about 250 Tomahawk cruise missiles going off at once. There should have been a huge explosion when the thing stopped, right? And that didn't happen. There's no sonic boom. There's no fireball when it's moving through the air at 40,000 miles an hour, which should happen. There's
There's just the friction with the air
no
should.
friction of the air should have caused a problem. There's no sound at all whatsoever, and no explosion when it stops. So we there. So how anomalous is this? It's really anomalous. I mean, there are many aspects of this that are, I can't begin to put together a physics picture of what happened.
So when you look at that, do you? And I know it is just pure speculation, but you can speculate within some, some boundaries. What sort of technology do you imagine is required in order to move an object that way and to stop it? Is accelerating and decelerating it the same sort of technology, or do you have a braking
It,
system?
it can't be it can't be working the way that any of our stuff works. It has to be totally different. How could it be different? Well, you those accelerations are really extreme, and it's hard to imagine how the frame of the Tic Tac could have handled 5,000 G's acceleration. So you almost have to hypothesize that somehow inertia isn't a problem. Somehow the inertial effects are gone. So how could that possibly be? Well, that could be if you're playing around with gravity and if you're playing around with inertia, it's the same as playing around with gravity through the equivalence principle. So you've got to be able to play around with gravity and inertia in some way, which comes down to, the only way we can really think about is warping space-time. So this is what leads to the idea that perhaps these things are warping space-time in some way. Can
Is that your
you
bet? Is that your best
can you
guess?
detect that with instrumentation? I'd love to try, and it's a hypothesis that's on the table, and then now the work that I do with UAPx and in trying to detect these things and measure things, this is one of the things that you want to then look for. How could you detect that space-time is being warped?
How can you? What's the plan for how to do
Well,
it?
you could try to detect whether there's any optical distortions around the object. Space-time warping would change the light
Sort of
propagation around the
lensing effect,
object,
like with a black
so you
hole
could
or
get some
something.
gravitational lensing effect. Can you detect that? And then if you can you quantify it and characterize it? And maybe you could actually map out the gravitational field around the object. So that would be nice if you could do that. There are some other things that should happen. You should get a Doppler shifts happening, so you get a gravitational Doppler shifts. Those you should be able to detect, but you'd have to be measuring the light spectrum of the object.
So the
So,
light would shift towards blue or
so
red,
you'd,
depending on
you'd
how.
imagine some blue or red shift depending on which way the field is being warped. Yeah.
So if you
So
could,
there are ways to do this, and in fact, in the Aguadilla, Puerto Rico case,
Mhm.
in that video is not as trivial as a lot of the skeptics would like to make it out to
this is
be.
the Go Fast video.
No, the Aguadilla, the Homeland Security video from Puerto Rico
So it's like
of the
the spherical
football-shaped object that flies over the airfield.
underwater. Does it go
Yeah, and
underwater?
then goes
Or
over water. It goes
okay.
underwater as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because Chinese lanterns go underwater and come back out at 100 miles an hour all the time. And so, yeah, so that's the one that Robert Powell and others from SCU wrote up a nice report on. And one of the important facts about that video is when it flies over the airfield, at one point it flies over a parking lot, and you've got the lines from the parking spaces, and you can see that they warp around the object. So there's actually some optical warping going on. And if I had time, which is always the problem, I would love to analyze the warping of the optical field around the object as it goes over that parking lot, because it would tell you how the light paths are changing, right? So could that happen because of temperature changes around the object? Yes, it could, but then you could use the amount of warping to figure out what the temperatures would have to be to cause that effect and see if that's reasonable or not. But you could also use it to possibly map out the space-time warping as well. So there's a lot that could be done even with that video there. So we do have some data. It's not all hopeless. And of course, at UAPx we're hoping to collect more data and more carefully collected data. But
How
there
so?
is data to
Are,
work with to get
you're,
some idea at least of what we're dealing with.
are you creating sort of systems of sensors and new ways of collecting data? And how do you collect data on something you don't know where it's going to show up or when?
Well, that's the hard part, right? You've got to somehow find places where these things are often seen. And so some of us are now strategizing how best to do this. So one of the ideas is to make a smaller camera system that you can literally just go set in a place for 2 weeks and just let it observe and see if you see anything. And if you can make these small and relatively cheap, you can set a lot of them around and see if you can see these things. This is one reason why reports are useful. So when you, like recently we had the plane out of LaGuardia, I guess, in New York, where a woman got a photograph of a UFO from the plane there, just
I
south of
don't
Long.
know about this case.
Yeah, just south of Long Island. So there's been some observations near Long Island. Um, Albany's not that far from Pine Bush, New York, where there's been a lot of lights, like very much like the Heselden lights.
Hmm.
So that's another place you can set up and observe.
So if you could know that a UAP was going to appear and move around somewhere beforehand, what would you ideally want to set up and measure? And what's the sort of dream system that you would put together?
I would love to have a dream system like this. I would have an array of high quality cameras with and why would I need an array? Well, first you want to do triangulation, so they can't all be right together. You want to spread them out to some degree. Um, I want different focal length lenses on them. So some of them I want like 50 millimeter lens, so you got a good view. Some of them I want to have much, 400 millimeter lens to be able to track these things. So you can aim a camera with a 400 millimeter lens at it, would be ideal. So you can get high quality magnified images, hopefully.
Mhm.
Um, some of the cameras would have polarizing filters on them, so you can look at polarized light, and polarized light can be affected by magnetic fields. So you could, and the light in the sky is naturally polarized, so you can use that as a source of polarized light, and you can see magnetic field effects around these objects. So different polarizing filters on different cameras. Um, Spectrometers, I want to be able to measure the spectrum of light coming from the object. And then some of the cameras I would like to be photographing over different time exposures. So you can get very quick pictures, very long-term pictures where you actually get the track instead of the close-up of the good view of the object itself. Those would be useful. I want to measure electric and magnetic fields. Um, I want to measure radio transmissions. So I want to measure electromagnetic radiation coming from these things. I want to measure gravitational fields. Wondering if I'm forgetting anything. I'm going to forget sounds. Sounds. I want to measure nice parabolic microphones with a good range of both infrasound all the way through ultrasound. So I want an array of microphones to be able to do that as well.
When
And
people say a UFO is totally silent, it may be that it's actually emitting sound in
be
some.
ultrasound or infrasound that we can't hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you want
So
to be able to detect that.
how much does your dream system cost?
Oh, how much would it cost? Probably about, yeah, I've actually worked out budgets for these things.
I had a
Dream system is probably about $15,000 to $20,000.
It's actually
So
not
it's
crazy.
a
I mean,
lot, but it's not crazy. Yeah.
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 And how many of these would you, is this what you'd want to set up sort of at all sorts of places and let it just sit
I'd
there?
want to set this up at a place where we knew that you had a chance of seeing objects, So this is a place where you'd want to monitor the equipment and be present. You don't want anybody coming and stealing your cameras or anything.
Oh, that's a good point. So this isn't your area to necessarily to know where UAPs are most common, but do you have locations in mind that you know of that
we have locations in mind. Yeah. Yeah.
is that something you want to keep secret?
We've shared it with other scientists that so I'm friends with Wes Waters from the Galileo project, and we talk about these things. So he knows where I'd like to look. I know where he'd like to look. And
But it's not something you want to publicly say and then have a bunch of people
no,
spend.
probably not. It's probably better to keep some of these places, not keep it quiet, but just so that when we do go study it, we don't have to worry about people coming and ransacking our equipment.
Yeah,
That's what I would worry about most, actually.
a lot of
Uh,
Apple AirTags for them.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things, some events that we're keeping an eye on. So we know that UFOs will show up um, nuclear weapon sites. When we're not going to monitor a nuclear weapon site without permission, of course. That
Maybe
would
I'd let
be
you.
that would be a bad idea. But they also show up during disasters, natural disasters, like the Fukushima nuclear power plant when that was hit with the tidal wave, with the tsunami. There were UFOs there the next day. So The Plymouth nuclear power plant in Massachusetts, which has been shut down, still has holding tanks of radioactive water that they got to get rid of at some point. And it very probably will eventually end up being dumped into Boston Harbor or the bay there.
So
So
radioactive water will be dumped into the bay.
eventually that'll probably have to happen. Either that or you let it seep into the groundwater. So they got to get rid of it, right?
Oh, so it's not in containers already. That they have this problem of
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's in a pond or something. So it's a yeah. So these are tough environmental decisions that have to be made, but we try to keep an eye on those because if they do decide to dump that water into the bay, then I want to be there with UFO watching equipment in case UFOs show up, with what are these crazy people doing now dumping radioactive water into the ocean? Um, and there's a nuclear power plant down south south of here on the Hudson River as well that is in a similar situation.
Well, you're not
So
far from 3 Mile Island, are you?
not far from there either, yeah. So these are places that we also keep an eye on, and if there's activity there, then it might be a good idea to get our equipment down there.
Fascinating. So yeah, we're looking for global disasters. But you seem to be focusing on the ones you mentioned, at least, are all nuclear. Are there, or at least, I mean,
Well, those are the
kind of
ones that
became
we
a
know
nuclear
of that
problem.
could, are being discussed and planned, right? They're
No,
trying to decide. They're trying to decide what to do. So,
I meant the catastrophes that you say seem to attract UAP are all nuclear. Is that the pattern, or
oh
do
well,
they seem to also
nuclear
show up just as
catastrophes are one that attracts attention. So we know that. They are attracted to war zones as well and things like that. But I'm not eager to run to Ukraine with our equipment. And you've also got all sorts of other things that you're going to observe that you have to sort out from UFOs, right? Missiles and airplanes and God knows what shells. So war zones are difficult places to go looking. Um,
yeah, they're not designed for scientific sort of
no, you
observation.
don't want to send a science team to a place like that.
Do we know that they're actually more common, that the UAP encounters are more common in war zones, or is it possible that we just have more sensing and observing going on there in the
Well,
first?
that's possible that there's more sensing and observing there. We know a little bit about that just from the military reports of UFOs, but those are usually happening when we're deployed or somewhere, right? And that's when there's action. Um, so it may just be, it's not immediately clear whether it's because of the war activities or whether we just have
More
more sensing.
planes, yeah. But there's at
That's
least,
not immediately clear. I'm sure the military may know better, but I don't.
I doubt they're interested in sharing that in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
So you are interested in studying UAP directly and empirically. Um, I want to pose to you a problem that I come back to and think a lot about when it comes to this subject, and see what you, as a physicist who's interested in the empirical dimension of this, has to say. So, one way of telling the history of the UAP concept is to say that, look, we started in like the 1940s with, or we started at the end of World War II with Foo Fighters, these sort of luminous spherical objects that,
That was when they entered our consciousness, basically. That's when we in the States especially became aware of them.
sure, yeah, and that's why I say we're talking about the history of the concept, not the history of UAP themselves, because it could go back. Well, I mean, I think it
They go
probably
back to
does.
antiquity,
Yeah,
really.
but we sort of form a different concept when we're looking at Foo Fighters, and we kind of technologize these encounters. So at the end of World War II, you have all these pilots, and there's not yet a stigma against reporting these things because nobody's really talked about them. They haven't been in science fiction so much, or whatever. So you get a lot of reports of Foo Fighters, strange objects. Also because all of these pilots were charged with the job of reporting if they saw anything that while they were flying. Because we have these fears that the Germans are going to have some advanced propulsion technology or something. So we start with Foo Fighters, and then Kenneth Arnold has a sighting and a report of that sighting gets sort of garbled. He didn't say that he saw flying saucers. He said he saw objects that move the way saucers would if they're skipping over water, and then that kind of gets
Right. They were kind of disc-shaped or crescent-shaped, right?
yeah. I think he said they were shaped like the heel of a shoe, like this kind of weird pointy U shape.
Right.
And then so that kind of gets garbled in headlines spread, and then people actually do start seeing flying saucers, which is a weird thing that I wonder about, but we'll sideline that. Flying saucers then get kind of bureaucratically um, recast as unidentified flying objects in the 50s, maybe. Those stick around. That concept sticks around for a long time until the early 2000s when we reframe them as UAP. Each step in that sort of sequence of shifts is the exact opposite direction of what we normally do when we're refining a concept in science. Because each of those steps, we get less and less specific about what it is. A Foo Fighter is a very specific
A
kind of
very specific
phenomenon.
thing. That's
Yeah.
right. That's true.
A flying saucer is less because all we have is a shape. Then we have a shape and a behavior. A
Mhm.
UFO doesn't have any definite shape. We just know it's an object that we don't know what it is, and it's flying. UAP, we don't even know if they're either objects or if they're flying, because flying is very specific, has a definition, right? You need
And
some.
it's a phenomenon now instead of an object,
Yeah,
right?
it's no longer an object. It's now a phenomenon. That's kind of weird to have a whole subject now, the core of which is becoming less and less well defined and specific. How do you empirically study something where the very definition of it is just kind of a question mark? We don't know what it is. It's a phenomenon. We don't know if it's a thing or an object in the traditional sense at all. So, like, how do you go about forming a research project around that?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to do is develop some kind of taxonomy, right? You need to come up with some way of classifying these things, whether it's based on, can't just be based on appearance, but can be based on appearance and behavior and situation, right? Coming up with a taxonomy is the first thing that needs to really happen. And it's not, and when we're faced with a difficulty in that there's a stigma attached to one of the hypotheses of what some of these things might be,
The
right?
extraterrestrial hypothesis.
The extraterrestrial hypothesis, um, which which to me I don't actually see very unlikely anymore. I think that that's actually very, very probable. Um, and so I also see it as a strange reaction again there. But once you've developed some kind of taxonomy, then you can start to tease apart what you're looking at and what you're trying to study. These things they're clearly not all alien spacecraft. Um,
Why? Why do you think that?
nobody would claim that. Some of them are weather balloons,
Oh,
and
you
some
just mean
are,
unidentified objects that
yeah, some of them are Chinese balloons. Some of them are very possibly atmospheric phenomena that we don't know anything about. That's all very true. Um, and being a lifelong bird watcher, I've seen pictures of birds um, as UFOs, and they're just not obviously birds from their positioning or in the photo. Um, and so and I've seen pictures of bats as UFOs as
Yeah.
well. So it's not, it's and it's hard to until you have that taxonomy, it's hard to start differentiating between these things, and it's hard to start learning about them. I'm often asked, how do UFOs fly? Well, we don't even know what they all are. And even if you were able to somehow limit it to a class of what we think are probably some kind of spacecraft or craft, I still couldn't tell you how they fly because they're not all the same thing. It's kind of asking, like, how does a car work? Well, there are electric cars, there are diesel cars, there's gasoline powered cars, there's hybrid cars. Um, they um, they are all different, and
So, do all of the truly anomalous uh, observations seem like spacecraft to you?
no, they don't.
The other
The
options,
Heselden lights and the lights in Pine Bush are very different. They're very strange. Um, they're typically not moving at high speeds. People have gotten the spectra of these things. In some cases, the spectra show the same elements of the dirt that's in the region. Sometimes they'll move around in loops and they'll flash. The ones in Pine Bush sometimes flash on and off, and they're strange things, and they disappear into the ground or appear out of the ground, and it's not clear. It's not clear what they are. And I think that that's true for some of these phenomena. We just don't at all know what they are. Um, there are others that, appear to move fast. If people see them quite well and describe them with detail, and they appear to be craft. Um,
because why do they appear to be craft? Why is that the assumption? I mean, a craft means that there's like an interior and there's
well,
something.
some of these things are metallic with lights on them, and some of the, some sightings are quite dramatic this way, and they're well described. It's not like the person didn't see what they were looking at. They know what they saw in many of these cases, but we just don't know what they are.
So, is the judgment that they're craft? Um, is that really just the judgment that they seem like technologies, like
They seem like technology, yeah,
find
yeah.
object, not necessarily craft in the sense of like
Not
automobiles?
necessarily like somebody's flying in them. Although there have been cases where people have seen things with windows and seen beings appear looking out of the windows. That's happened too.
I've seen doors open
The
and
one
seen
in
those
Papua New Guinea, they waved to the pilots standing on the craft itself, and they waved back. Right, that was happening in Papua New Guinea. So I mean, there's many different cases, many different events, many phenomena, and these things aren't all the same. This is a very interesting and complicated problem, and there's a lot to be discovered here. I think that there's a lot of discoveries to make. They're not just one thing.
Do you have in your mind a taxonomy of the different kinds?
Oh, not really.
We have like the Heselden lights, which
I
are
mean,
sort of like
I try to. I mean, but it's very crude. It's like there's I'll sometimes joke. I'm only interested in the ones that are craft, right? Because
because you have the
but
tools to
I
study
don't
that,
always know which ones are craft and which ones aren't, and you can't always tell. And I think that's not that simple.
Yeah.
Reality.
So you mentioned that there's a stigma obviously attached to one interpretation of the phenomenon, which is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. What do you see as like the landscape of plausible theories that are at least worth considering for explanations?
It's difficult because right now we're in a position where we really don't know much at all, and it really is smart just to keep all the hypotheses on the table. Um,
So which are the ones on the table? We have the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
yeah, so there are the natural phenomena, which of course there's a class there. There's the craft phenomena, the things that appear to be craft. Well, then who made them, right? This is the next big question. Where do these craft come from? What are they like? So of course there's human-made craft. And of course that's always a possibility. And we know from history that that's been a um, confounding problem. So
That some will be experimental,
there are
actually are
human-made
experimental.
experimental craft that people observe and don't know what they are. So that happens. Um, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is one. The other term is ultra terrestrial, like there's somebody else who lives here on Earth, who's not human, a non-human earth-dwelling species that has some kind of craft. They live in our oceans, they live underground, or maybe in the asteroid belt or something like this. But they're from this area as well, or been here throughout human history. So that's another possibility. They could be time travelers. That's another possibility. Time travelers from the future, time travelers from the past. You
Always assume
really,
they're from the future. I never.
there's, I'm sorry.
People always assume if they're time travelers, they're from the future.
Yeah, that's not obvious.
Yeah,
You can't, if you're going to assume time travelers from the future, then you've got to also
go either
consider
way.
time travelers from the past. And that's a possibility too. So we really, there's a lot of possibilities, and it could be several of these
Yeah, we could have
hypotheses may end
multiple.
up being
Oh,
true
yeah.
at once, and which will be again be confounding. And it'll be difficult to sort things out.
If you had to, you mentioned teaching sort of Bayesian analysis before. If you had to just place your bets or where your leaning is, or your highest confidence in one interpretation, what would it be? What theory appeals to you the most?
Oof. My favorite hypothesis at this point is non-human, clearly non-human. I think that some of these phenomena are non-human craft. They live here on Earth. They're not coming from far away. When you had the Fukushima nuclear disaster, they showed up the next day. They're not coming from far away at all. There appears to be a presence in our oceans. So I think that's probably a good bet. You've got somebody living in our oceans who we don't know who they are. I think that's very possibly the situation. They could be extraterrestrial, but have been living here throughout human history. I think that's possible too.
You say there appears to be a presence in our oceans. Are you just referring to underwater, USOs?
Yeah, well, there's the transmedium, the fact that a lot of these craft have display transmedium capabilities. They can go from air to water, water to air without problems.
And if they're
You've been
warping,
seen throughout human history, and
yeah,
ship's logs go. I've got records of ship's logs going back to the 1800s. Ships in the 1800s that see a disc come out of the water, hover next to the ship, and then fly off into the sky. That's in the 1800s. I mean, this is 100 years before 1947.
yeah, it wasn't an experimental craft in the
Yeah,
1800s.
it's not an experimental
At
craft.
least not ours.
Not no, somebody's maybe right.
So I've talked to Robert Powell about this a few times, and I think you're in the ballpark of where his best bet is to, but he's made this point to me before that um, he thinks the probability that just one extraterrestrial uh, civilization has found and visited Earth is lower than the probability either that zero have or many have. So if there's ETs here, he thinks
There's
the
probably
probabilities
multiple
are
species
multiple
here.
ones. You think
I
that's
think
the case?
if you're going to find one race here, it's very possible you're going to find others.
Is that just because if we're discoverable or are easy to discover, you would assume that there are lots of other races around here who would have found us and come here too?
That's what I would think. Yeah.
You're actually sort of working on this, right? You're let's see if I can get it right. You're working on a project where you simulate lots of different you simulate a universe that has lots of different planets, and some of those planets have civilizations that emerge on them, and some of those civilizations get off their planet, and some of them find Earth, and then you try to look and see what are the characteristics of the civilizations that do find Earth and visit here. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I was doing. I decided to, again, when you ask a scientist, somebody who's, have some kind of education on these types of topics, what's the probability that, what's the chance that, a civilization could come to Earth, find Earth and come to Earth? You get wildly varying responses. And they're clearly emotional responses because they're very invested in the responses and they don't have any real reasons for what they believe. So I decided what really ought to happen is we ought to be using our knowledge of physics and engineering to educate ourselves as to what the possibilities actually are. So that's the motivation. And so what I did is I started simulating civilizations in our galaxy that that undertake colonization of other star systems.
Okay.
And so how do you simulate a civilization? Well, you've got to keep it simple. Stupid is the first rule. So let's make it super simple. We'll only simulate the civilization with a few model parameters. So since I'm interested in interstellar colonization, these are going to be parameters that will be related to colonization. So the civilization has a lifetime. It's going to exist for a certain period of time. They have a craft that can travel at certain accelerations and certain speeds. They have a duration in which they're willing to be in their spacecraft or able to. They have a parameter I call the resilience, which describes what the probability is that they'll have a place to colonize at any given star system. It's a probability that they can find a planet that they can live on there. And then there's different types of, what do you mean by colonization? That's widely varying as well. So there's a parameter that basically describes how easy it is to colonize. So are they setting up a base, like a scientific lab, or a monitoring base station, or a way station, or are they actually terraforming the place or exoforming it, right, and bringing in thousands of people? What are they actually doing? So there's basically amount of time it takes for them to set up a colony, and then before they move on to the next star system. So those were kind of the parameters I was looking at. And I just generated these at random. I've looked at about 1 million civilizations just randomly generated, and then see what the probabilities are, see what they do. And I found that many of them never make it out of their solar system.
Why?
It's just too,
Just
they just don't have the capability. They don't have anywhere nearby that they can go to. So the probability of finding a planet that they can live on is too low. So they don't have anywhere to go. And so they just stay on their home planet. That's the most common situation. And then what I did is I kept track of, out of these million civilizations, I keep track of which ones happen to find Earth.
so
And
they're
then
all distributed through
they're
our
all
galaxy.
distributed throughout the galaxy.
They have actual location.
In the galactic habitable zone in the galaxy. And I keep track of which ones find Earth out of 1 million civilizations. And then I did statistics on what they were like.
So how do you find Earth?
What were their model parameters? So then it tells you basically if somebody could engage in interstellar colonization and find Earth, this is what they're probably like, right?
So how many found Earth?
I'm sorry?
How many out of the million did find
How
Earth?
many found Earth? I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh my God. Let's see here. I'm at my computer, so I'm gonna try cheating.
We won't hold
I
you.
gave a talk on this recently in England. And it's a small percentage finds Earth, and probably the most interesting thing I found actually had to do with how long ago they found Earth. And it turns out that if somebody happened to find Earth and is present on Earth now, then their civilization would have discovered Earth about 250,000 years ago on average.
That is a fascinating find.
That was the surprise for me. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. If you're going to find Earth, you probably have been here for 250,000 years. That's pretty amazing.
How does that work? How does your simulation specify a particular time when
so the idea is that they have a certain lifetime, right? The civilization has a lifetime in the simulation, and then I have and then I have a time at which they find Earth in that, in their lifetime.
Oh, so if
And then
they
the
stuck
remaining
around and are
time
still here,
allows you to be able to have shifted back and forth as to when they started.
I see.
And
So
so you
if
can
they're
actually
still
figure out
here,
what
they've
happens.
probably been here that long. It doesn't.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, so the most probable time was 375,000 years ago. Um, yeah, and so the number that finds Earth, if somebody has found Earth and we find that somebody's been here, then there are at least 100 spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy. And so there's a lot of them out there, right? The galaxy is a big place, so they're not necessarily here. They probably would have come from nearby. I think the closest distance would be about 6,000 light years from here, and on average about 20,000 light years from here. So they're from our galactic neighborhood.
Wait, maybe I
Coming from
misunderstood.
the other side of the galaxy, they're coming from nearby, of course.
Were you saying that? I think I maybe misunderstood. Were you saying that if anybody has found us, there's probably 100 that have come here, or
No, 100 in the galaxy.
oh, in the okay, so
100 other civilizations in the galaxy. Yeah.
that's for everyone
For
that
everyone that
found
makes it
us.
here. Yep.
So out of your million, how many made it here?
So, and I don't think I have that in my slides, so I don't
Oh,
remember
sorry,
what the
we don't.
number is. That's unfortunate. Um, yeah, I had yeah, out of here's this. So out of about 10,000, you get about, yeah, so it's about 1.7% of the civilizations find Earth. But they have to be spacefaring and active.
That's a pretty
So
high
it's about
percentage,
so it's
actually.
a pretty high. So it's about 170 out of 10,000.
So then, what are they like? What are the most common ones that do find Earth and come here like? Are they
Well,
nomadic?
they're coming from our part of the galaxy, so from about 20,000 light years away tops, and they actually their spacecraft are it's interesting. It's pretty uniform distribution as to accelerations and speeds, as long as they can get to some percentage of the speed of light, 20% even, they can still do it. And that surprised me a little bit. I thought, I would have thought that, yeah, you have to be cruising at like 90% the speed of light, but no, you don't actually. So that was a little bit surprising to me. The craft didn't have to be that fast. And and those 90% of the speed of light's hard because you got a shield for radiation, you got a shield for all sorts of things. But 20% the speed of light's a little more reasonable. It's still crazy fast, but it's something that we're trying to eventually attain. So
That would require a lot of energy too. So they have to. I guess
it
the
would
initial.
require a lot of energy. 90% would require a crazy amount of energy. Yeah, but 20% you could do. Um,
Do you think that this actually reflects the situation in our galaxy?
I think it might. The other thing that I found another interesting thing that I'm trying to write up into a paper. I've got to write this civilization paper first. That's one of the papers I'm writing for July. Um, but I found that the resilience parameter has to be about 68%. You have to be able to colonize about 68% of the star systems to be able to keep going. Otherwise, you kind of peter out and you peter into filaments, and it doesn't expand. So that's a little difficult because right now we're looking at exoplanets that are in the habitable zone of the star, which is the zone at which you can have liquid water at the surface. Right, this is a nice temperature range for us, and we know that percentage already. It's 20%.
Which is
So
much
if
higher than 20 years ago. We thought. I mean, when I was a kid, it was like
it's a lot higher than we thought it
any
was
of it.
going to be, but it's still only 20%. That's 1 out of 5 stars, which is pretty impressive. You can go out tonight and pick out 5 stars. One of them has a planet that has the temperature of Earth, basically. But that doesn't mean you can live on it. In our solar system, we have 3 planets in the habitable zone: Venus, Earth, and Mars. And Venus is way too hot and Mars is way too cold. So, just because you have a system with a 20% chance of having a planet in the habitable zone doesn't mean it's going to be habitable for us. So we fall way below with the way we're planning to do things, going to Mars or whatever. We fall way below the 68% needed to sustain galactic colonization. So humans are not set up right now for galactic colonization. What do you have to do to hit that 68%? You have to either be able to live in space and be happy with that, so you can live on an airless world, or you have to live in the most common environment that we know of, which are oceans. Oceans are going to be common, are expected to be common on exoplanets.
I
Earth
mean,
is an
liquid
ocean
water
world.
oceans.
Liquid water ocean, yeah. But you have moons, like Jupiter's moons have oceans under the ice. So if you can get under the ice, you can live in the ocean there. So if you are set up to colonize worlds with oceans, then you can perform galactic colonization. That will work. And so this could be an answer as to why we find that we've got somebody living in our oceans.
Because that's just the best place.
That is the best, most stable place to live that you can prepare for and be pretty sure you're going to be able to find an ocean when you go to a star, right? And they might not have come from an ocean originally, but they are set up to live in the oceans. And
Why is it the best place? Tell us about that. Why are oceans the best place? I mean, you'll have you're guaranteed some sort of stable temperature range, but what else?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? The temperature range is important. A liquid water ocean is always going to be right between freezing water and boiling water. You are protected from flares from the star. You're protected from cosmic rays. You don't need an ozone layer. You're protected from UV. Oceans have a high heat capacity, so the water temperatures do not vary dramatically. If you live on the surface of the planet in the air, the temperature varies dramatically even in the day, right, from day to night. That doesn't happen in oceans. They can be stable for millions of years, and the temperature barely changes. The pressure is well controlled. You just go to the depth that you're happy with, and that's the pressure that you can control for pressure.
That's a good point.
The biggest problems with an ocean would be the chemicals that are dissolved in the ocean. So are there poisonous chemicals that are dissolved in the ocean that would be, like salt's poisonous to you, then you don't want to come to Earth, right? Or biologics. Those are the really 2 big problems then.
You mean like whales eating your ship or something?
Whales eating your ship or bacteria, right? One of the 2, right? Yeah. Yeah, so those would be the 2 big problems. Those are the 2 wild cards, but everything else is well controlled and can be planned for.
And if you have some sort of gravity manipulating way of propelling your craft, I guess it's not really much of a problem going underwater, right? I mean, you're kind of just.
It very well might not be. I don't know. That's one of the things that I was talking to another scientist recently about this. Actually, with Mike Safone, Mike's who you're going to be interviewing. Mike Safone and I were talking about this, and that I don't think anyone has really done the calculations regarding people have worked with warp bubbles before, like the Alcubierre drive and variants, right? But that's always done in a vacuum. I don't think anyone's done the calculations where what does that warp bubble do in the air and what does it do in water? I don't think anyone knows.
Do you have an intuition about what it does?
Not much. I would think that it would just work and he would be sheltered from it, but that's a naive guess, actually.
Yeah, I guess our intuitions really don't.
It's a cartoon guess. Yeah, it's cartoon physics.
That's a good concept. A cartoon guess. I remember talking to I can't remember who I was talking to. It was a scientist who worked at CERN, and he said that they would sort of sit around sometimes, just kind of like ask silly questions about what would happen, like if you stuck your hand in the Large Hadron Collider while it was on,
It's a great
and
question.
they they all had different answers. Like they're
Yeah,
working there, and they're like, I don't think it would do anything, and another one's like, I think it would just vaporize your hand, or I think you'd get cancer or something. Like their intuitions go all over the place, and I think
it's
that
funny with these questions. This is how the interstellar colonization thing goes. Yeah, we don't. You don't. You have to really think about it to get an answer. And with the colonization thing, the only thing I could do is do simulations. But maybe that's what you'd have to do with sticking your hand in the Large Hadron
you get a
Collider.
hand and stick it in
I
there.
don't know. I don't know what would happen. That would be interesting. I mean, I love questions like that. You know, the my two favorite ones are does teleportation conserve momentum?
Ooh, okay. So
That's one of my favorite ones. I
I've
mean, it's
never even thought about that. So you're if you were moving while you were being teleported, would you be moving on the other end of the?
you'd have to conserve momentum, so you should be, you know. But then, what if your teleportation device changes orientation, and then what happens? I don't know. That's a little. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you can then wonder about that, right?
What's your next favorite one?
The other one I like is just more fanciful, but it's fun. What happens if you put a werewolf on the moon? I love that question. I was just like, oh, that's a brilliant question.
There's so many directions to take it. Like, does he just suffocate, or does the moonlight?
Yeah, he's on the
Moonlight's
moon, and
supposed to.
if he's on the day side, then what happens? I mean, it's a
That's
right.
that's hilarious.
These are things I think about late at night.
Okay, we're getting well, since we're both night owls, maybe we can like stray a little bit. This is a question. I'm a huge Star Trek fan.
What, Finn?
A huge Star Trek fan.
Oh, I was just up at Ticonderoga, which is in Ticonderoga, New York. They have a Star Trek convention there.
And you went to the
Me
convention?
and Matthew Shadagas both presented there this last weekend, which was great
Oh,
fun. And Wes Waters from the Galileo Project came out too. We all went. Great fun. We met Walter Koenig,
yeah,
Chekhov. To
yeah.
meet him, a very nice man. And LeVar Burton was there too, and Jonathan Frakes. It was wonderful. Yeah,
The dream. That's you
it
get to
was
do the
great fun.
coolest. Not a lot of physicists get to do that. You're kind of like living the dream of.
It's really fun. Yeah, that was a
So
lot of fun.
so one of my questions then for every like science minded Trek fan is: would you get in a teleporter?
What?
Would you get in a teleporter? Would you allow yourself to be teleported?
Ooh.
Because I think it kills you. I'm like 100. I'm confident that whatever
Oh,
comes
because it
out
takes you apart.
on the
Yeah,
other,
because it
yeah,
takes
you're
you
dead.
apart and puts you back together again.
Yeah, the first thing it does is kill you.
What happens to your consciousness? I mean, if your consciousness is in your brain, then it should work. But if it isn't in your brain, then what happens? That's what would worry me a bit. I wouldn't be the first one to get in a teleporter. If Matthew got in before I did, then I would go.
You think the thing that comes out on the other end is you, or is it just a new?
Well, this is worrisome. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers for movies, but the movie The Prestige, have you seen that film?
Yes, it's a very good film.
Yeah, it's a very good film, but that's what you then worry about, right? That's that whole question is central to that film. And that's all I'm going to say about it because I don't want to ruin for anybody. But if you want to see a good movie, watch The Prestige.
It's a very good movie.
Fantastic film. Yeah. Isn't David Bowie
David
playing
Bowie,
Tesla?
yeah,
He plays
he was
Tesla. Yeah, that's
Nikola
fun.
Tesla.
I mean, it's a minor part, but it's
But I can't
uh,
imagine a better. I don't really know a lot about Tesla, but I hope that David Bowie is the best decision for who should play Nikola Tesla. That's my image of him because I love
David
him.
Bowie's a good decision for anything, I think.
Did you see The Man Who Fell to Earth?
Yes. A
Yeah,
long, long time ago. Yeah, that was great. Yeah.
his first acting things, I think.
Was
Um,
it really? That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. You did that. I don't know how much of it is
I mean, he's
actually
the
acting.
perfect person for it. If you're going to pick somebody,
Yeah,
you pick David Bowie. Yeah.
he was in his like Ziggy Stardust phase at that
He
point.
started his phase, right?
Okay, and we've gotten through most of the questions that I wanted to ask you.
Getting a teleporter, that's a good one. Yeah, I'd go after somebody. I don't know if you'd be the same person that comes out. That's worrisome. Yeah.
I there's so many variations
Because
of
you can treat it as a duplicator too, right? So then what
yeah,
happens? You get two of you, and then that's a. mm, These are tough problems, actually. And you're a philosopher, right? So
yeah, yeah. I
these
have.
are really tough problems, actually.
I, if my expertise in philosophy, which is not a real thing, but If it counts for anything, my one sage piece of advice for everyone in the future is don't get in the teleporter. It's death. It just teleportation is death. Whatever comes out on the other end isn't the same person that went in. Because what if the first step, I mean, it takes you apart at the atomic level, right? That's the theory about how, in the Star Trek lore, it's how it works. Like, what if that kills you, right? If it didn't spit you out on the other end, you'd think, well, you're definitely just dead. But if it spit out two of you on the other end, you wouldn't. There's just any variation you think too far into it, you think, oh, I think that person died.
I remember the scene in Star Trek One where the teleporter malfunctions. I remember that was really scary. That was terrifying when I was, I don't know how old I was. I was in high school. I saw that in the theater, and I was
Yeah.
mortified by that scene.
And there's some Next Generation episodes too. Like there's one where Riker gets like duplicated or something, and we
Ah, right.
didn't catch on to it. My cat is about to cause some. Let me stop her. Come here.
Okay.
She probably does that all the time when I'm not here. But okay, let me throw one more question at you before we get to the final fun ones. So this has to do with the public perception of the sort of state of consensus around the UAP topic. So most people who are like kind of mildly attuned to the science news probably aware that at some point the Pentagon said, yeah, we said that we haven't been studying UFOs that we did in the 70s. We didn't find anything. But that's not actually true. We've been studying them whole time, and some of these videos that you've seen leaked are actually real anomalous objects. We don't know what they are. And probably people are also aware that like NASA to some degree has studied this subject, but that their conclusion so far is, and they say this explicitly, there's no evidence that UFOs or UAP are extraterrestrial in origin. I hear that and it frustrates me deeply, not because I really want these to be extraterrestrials, but because the statement that we've looked at UAP and there's no evidence that they're extraterrestrial in origin seems to me like kind of intentional obfuscating, because I don't even think that the data that they study could be taken as evidence of extraterrestrial origin. Like
Exactly.
we're
They
studying.
haven't been. It's almost like saying that there's no life on Mars. We haven't really looked. For real. We barely looked. And I think that's really what's happened, happened with our government studying these things. The internal chaos that surrounds these studies is, with the taboo and people not wanting to consider certain hypotheses and all of this, is it just leads to such chaos that they I don't think they've done anything. And I'm not sure I'm not sure that they know anything. I'm not convinced that they know a lot even.
They being
Uh,
NASA or the governments in
any
general.
of them. Any of them. I don't think it's been well studied, and I don't think that they have any useful information. I mean, if they have bodies in craft, then they've done something. But aside from that, from what I've read about their studies, there's so much chaos and so much politics involved that they haven't looked at the right things, and they haven't come to the reasonable conclusions.
What would be the reasonable conclusions, or have they
I
just?
mean, well, that's hard to it's hard to gauge, but I mean, I'll quote Herman Oberth, who is a rocketry pioneer. He was the
Herman,
mentor to Werner von Braun, and Herman Oberth gave a talk in 1954 on UFOs, and you can find the transcripts or his notes from the talk online, and I think even SU has them on their website. And in 1954, Herman Oberth noted that there have been radar measurements of UFOs exceeding speeds of 19 kilometers a second, which is about 40,000 miles an hour. It's about the speed that we calculated for the Nimitz encounter, for what Kevin Day recorded in radar. It was the same ballpark. I believe him. And he noted in his talk that they've recorded speeds on the order of 19 kilometers a second, and that if it were only 2 or 3 radar recordings, he wouldn't believe it and he would wait till there's better data. But he said in his talk that he has seen more than 50 radar measurements of this order. That's 1954. Rocketry pioneer Herman Oberth knew this and talked about it openly. What conclusion do you make of that? Well, these things are moving faster than spacecraft. I mean, this was 54. We barely had spacecraft, right? I mean, Sputnik had gone up. And so you've got satellites, which are, satellites in low Earth orbit are only going like 17,000 miles an hour. So he's talking about measuring speeds of craft going faster than our fastest spacecraft at the time. And then you're going to have our officials say, well, there's no evidence that these things are extraterrestrial. Well, they're certainly not human.
Yeah.
How much evidence do you need, really? And at some point you just have to put on your big boy pants and accept the reality. And the reality is these things are fast, and they've been measured to be fast over and over and over again. And the accelerations are entirely unreasonable, and Herman Oberth notes that as well. These are not human craft.
So just by
that's what everything that we've seen so far shows us.
By elimination, it has to be something.
By elimination, it has to be something else. Yeah.
That's interesting, because that's not the opposite, but that's the sort of obverse of the frustration I have, is that I think that when, like, NASA says we've seen no evidence that these things are extraterrestrial, the sort of data that they look at isn't even the sort of data that would indicate a particular origin or not. It's like we can look at how.
Right. Well, how can you tell whether anything's extraterrestrial?
Yeah, I mean, what would be
what experiment would you do? So that already is a fraught question, right? The answer is going to be no, always. And which is why Congress moved to non-human rather than extraterrestrial.
Yes,
that was done on purpose, because can we at least tell that? Well, the answer is yes. We know, I'm pretty certain that some of these things are non-human craft.
Yes.
There's no other solution.
And I don't think that's trivial. I don't think that's just a trivial distinction, extraterrestrial and non-human. I mean, it's
not trivial at all. And and they're not exclusive either. They're not mutually exclusive either. So it's complicated.
I wish that NASA would say, we have concluded that they're not human, but we don't conclude that they're extraterrestrial, because that would be.
But we don't even know what they looked at. That's the other thing. And what data did they consider, and what did they look at? And that's difficult. The NASA panel. I remember when they were forming it, me and several other current and former NASA employees who study UAP all got together and exchange notes. Did anybody contact you? Are you going to be on this panel? And I know at least 7 scientists who are current and or former NASA who have studied UAP. None of us were even contacted about this panel. Okay, so maybe they're forming a panel where the members are all agnostic, right? Which in some sense sounds fair, but at the same time, they're also ignorant.
Yeah, I mean, almost by definition, because
by definition, so that's the problem. So is that really a good thing? I don't think so. Not when you're trying to answer a question. When you want to answer a question, you don't want somebody who is agnostic. You want somebody who knows something. And so none of us were ever contacted. And what did they do? What data did they look at? Did they interview any astronauts? There have been astronauts who've seen things.
Oh yeah, certainly.
And have talked about it. I talked to Alan Bean, Apollo 12, Alan Bean. He walked over to the Surveyor probe on the moon, right? I talked to him personally, and he told me about this red flashing light that they photographed from Skylab when he was up in Skylab. And those photographs exist. They're online. You can find them. You can read about it. It's a red flashing light in space. Nobody puts lights on satellites. What the hell is it?
What would the purpose of a lighthouse?
What would it be? And so what did NASA do with that? Why was there not a section on astronaut reports in their write-up even? That didn't even exist. They didn't even write up anything. Cosmonauts have seen things. Could NASA have interviewed cosmonauts? Certainly they could have. Nobody interviewed. We have transcripts from, what is it, Gemini 11, where they report seeing things outside the ship.
Yeah.
And that wasn't in the report either. So what was NASA actually reporting on? What were they looking at that they concluded was not terrestrial or not extraterrestrial? I'm not sure what they did, but this is par for the course for all of these government studies. I'm not sure what any of them did. And this is really why we scientists have to get involved. When we do a study, we write it up, we write up the details, it gets peer reviewed. That's what I'm doing for UAPx right now. Our paper's on the archive, but it's being considered for a journal right now, and we're writing up the revisions for it.
Can you say which journal?
Comments that we've got to answer and to make the report better.
Can you say which journal?
I'm sorry?
Can you say which journal?
I probably shouldn't.
Okay.
It's provisionally accepted, but
good. Well, congratulations.
But we have to make our revisions first, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're willing to. Have you faced a lot of professional sort of?
Sorry?
Have you faced a lot of professional consequences for?
No. In fact, quite the opposite, which is really refreshing. I get emails pretty regularly from other scientists and other academics, usually commending me for my work and saying how brave I am and stuff, which makes me a little uncomfortable because it doesn't feel very brave. But
I think that's what bravery feels.
Very often thanking me for my work, and then many of them are asking, well, if there's anything I can do or how can I help, I would like to. And I think that's great. I wish I knew ways that people could help. I don't have many ways people could help, but
yeah, I'm stumped by that question too. I mean, as an academic or recovering academic, I guess I've talked to several people. I've never had anybody. I mean, I've had people sort of shrug it off and just not be interested, but that's not the same as like.
Yeah, it's not the same. I've had people not be interested, but I've never had anybody criticize me for it.
Yeah. I'm disappointed when people aren't interested because it's so fascinating to me. But that's just the nature of being interested.
Oh, yeah, the whole thing is for me endlessly fascinating. Yeah, I'll mention something I heard today. I listened to for when I'm writing or something, I listen to a podcast, Beliefful podcast, because they go through all sorts of cool.
Those guys are great. It's like three brothers and they
talk about all sorts of just weird stuff, right? And it's just fun. It's mostly just fun to listen to, but but I was listening to, they were talking about UFO encounters in Alaska, and they talked about an animal mutilation case where these people came across, it was a UFO in a clearing or something, and then they had left carcasses of animals in a circle. Oh. And there were caribou and elk and a couple of grizzly bears, and they're all dead and mutilated, right? And an orca. And they were hundreds of miles from the coast in Alaska. And I was listening to this, I was like, whoa, what, an orca? All I could think, I thought I have to email Timothy Gallaudet about this, Admiral Gallaudet, because I want to see that. I want to see a disc picking up an orca. What does that look like? How did that happen? I want to know. That would be amazing, right?
Does it just fly with an orca suspended in air beneath, or is it?
I don't know. Does it get picked up in a beam of light like some people report, or and what would that? An orca. If I want to see anything in the world, that's one thing on my list. I want to see that
out of the ocean by UFO.
Not that I want another orca to undergo mutilation like this, but
an already dead orca, maybe.
Already like that. Yeah, I mean, this is
what a weird case.
How can you not be interested in these things? These are weird. Some of these stories are really strange, and if there's an element of truth to any of them, then it's fascinating. How can you walk away from this?
I totally agree. I mean, I think I don't know exactly when I became interested in this subject. I mean, I sort of can like date it with reading Diana Pasulka's book for her first book, American Cosmic, was something.
America's Cosmic. Yeah,
That's when I
that's another
knew I
one
was
that I
interested.
read when I first started. Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
fantastic book.
it
She's great.
is.
But I was interested before that in just all sorts of anomalous, weird stuff. Like I started reading books by William Corliss at some point, who's kind of like the more I think was a I don't know if he was a physicist or a geologist or something. He was some sort of hard scientist, and he just collected like lots of articles that had been published in Nature and Scientific American. They're all peer-reviewed articles, but they just deal with weird scientific anomalies that don't fit in our kind of
Porless, is it Porless? Yeah, I have his.
Corliss, C O
Yeah,
R
I've got his
L.
book over here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're
Yeah,
just
I know.
anomalies, right? Oh, weird
Yeah,
stuff.
animal rains and things. And it's like these things actually do happen. We
Some of
don't
these
know
things happen,
how they.
and I mean, what do you do when this happens, and how do you think about things, and how are it's this stuff fascinates me. Yeah,
The world is a bizarre place, and our
a
sense that
weird world out there. You gotta. I told my son this. I said it's a weird world out there. You be careful
that's
outside.
good for. I mean, like, what do? You just watch for animal rains and make sure they don't happen. But I mean, that's part of this the kind of like psychological imperative that keeps us insulated from really thinking too much about this because if if you really sit down and contemplate and accept how bizarre reality is sometimes, it's kind of paralyzing. Like you don't know what to do
Some
with.
of it's really bizarre, and some of it actually happens, which is really worrisome at times. And I think that's what I mean. This is what experiencers face, right? Experiencers face this all the time, and this is I have some sympathy for this. This is it's a weird world out there. Yeah, and just even mentioning one of the weird effects that people report. This was a little really bizarre. Sometimes when people are close to UFOs, they will later report levitating, just levitating.
Not
I
during
was
the
reading
encounter, but
one story, not during the encounter, but afterwards.
yeah.
So this high strangeness somehow sticks to you, and then. But I was reading one woman was in the kitchen and just doing dishes in the kitchen and realized she was a foot off the ground. Um, Weird stories, man.
I mean,
And
I'm
you got to wonder well, wait a minute, is she lying or is she nuts or is something actually happening?
yes.
I don't know what the answer is to
I
that,
mean,
but
that's the thing to me is that any explanation is interesting to me. If people are just lying about this, the sort of like
that's also
coherent,
interesting.
fascinating. Why is that happening? Why is there an epidemic of these particular lies and people who aren't known to lie? I mean, they have
Coming up with weird lies. I mean, it would be a strange thing to lie about, right?
yeah,
Oh,
it
by
was.
the
I
way, I
mean,
was levitating the other day. It scared me a little.
you have
I
so
mean,
many
that would be
incentives
a
not
weird
to lie
thing to
about.
say.
Like you don't want people to think. People don't want to be thought of as crazy. People don't want attention. They don't. You don't get any money for telling the news that you were abducted
Right?
by a
A
UFO.
Weekly World News is not giving you $1,000 for that. That's
They're
not
not.
going to happen.
They're closed, aren't they? Didn't they? They
They're
shut.
probably closed.
I
Yeah.
think they did. I didn't even know. I didn't realize until I was an adult that was supposed to be satire. But we owe a lot
Which
to.
is funny. I remember. I don't remember what the articles were. There were two articles I stumbled on when I was in grad school. My One of my office mates had a subscription, and I
The
stumbled on
physical,
these
like
two
the act, yeah, when it was
to the
printed.
actual newspaper. And I stumbled on two articles that both took place in my hometown, and they were true because I knew that they had happened.
Oh no
And I
way!
was like, wait a minute, these are true stories. And I thought, what about the rest of this thing?
So, so there were
Right?
bizarre stories that actually happened that were then reported
They were
as
bizarre
satire.
stories that actually happened. I wish I knew what I don't remember off the top of my head what they were, but turned out they were true that I knew about.
What was
One
your
of them knew
hometown?
the people involved or something. It was strange.
What was your hometown?
Fond du Lac, Wisconsin.
Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I come from Milledgeville, Georgia, which used to have, no lie, the world's largest insane asylum back when things were actually called insane asylums.
Wow,
Is
that's something that's interesting. Growing up in a town like that where that's what you can say you're home known for.
and it's still there. I mean, the buildings are. It was like pre-civil or up to the
Excuse me.
Civil War. We had this just a large asylum for both my parents worked there. They're both nurses, and they had, it's just now a state mental hospital. But
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I got out of my hometown that my hometown was known as like the place where the crazy people are from. It's like you
Oh,
don't realize the
that's
rep.
amazing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, being from Wisconsin, I'm just from the state where there's serial killers. That's all.
oh, do you have like a higher
No, what?
like, do you have more serial killers than most
I
states?
don't know if there's more. There's a few prominent ones. That's all.
Like Ed Gein, was he Wisconsin?
Again, Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Don was from
It's no, that's, yeah, those are no good. But
something in the cheese.
Wisconsin
Yes.
must be the
Yeah.
cheese.
So, okay, so let's get to the final questions that I think of as the fun ones. What first of all, are you a sci-fi fan? I get the sense that you are. I
I
mean,
love sci-fi. Yep, yep, yep.
what's your
Totally.
favorite sci-fi?
Oh, it's tough. It's a hard one. I grew up with the Star Trek, the original series. I was I remember not being able to sleep when I was like 5, and then coming out into the living room, and my parents would let me lie down on the couch, and they'd have Star Trek on. And I remember really enjoying it, but always a little confused as to why there's a giant elf on the bridge of the Enterprise.
That was your concept
That
of
was my thought.
well,
That's how young I was. So yeah, so I grew up with Star Trek, and I was 12 when Star Wars hit. I mean, that's the right age to
yeah, that's
see Star
perfect.
Wars. So I started Star Wars in what, it came out like May 26th, 1977 or something. So I saw it in like the first week of June. My dad took me to see it. And we saw it in Milwaukee at a new theater that had their new sound system put in. So it was the new THX. The THX sound would be perfect for it. And yeah, that was amazing. And
What a
so,
great experience. Most, I mean, who who alive now has had the cinematic experience of watching Star Wars in theater? Uh,
yeah, and to see it then for the first time was magical. I mean, it was, and when you think about it, the whole first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie features just two robots.
oh, it is. Yeah, it starts with C-3PO and
It's totally, I mean, it's totally unconventional, right? There's no people in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. Nobody, no talking roles, right? So it's already so unconventional. I mean, and I don't know if that would be recognized today as such, but that's really a big deal. And
I
of
think it
course,
was when Wally came out. It was recognized for in the same way. I'd never thought about that with Star Wars, but Wally comes out, and I think the first like 30 minutes of the film, there's no dialogue. It's just
people, yeah, it's just Wally. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
okay. So other films or novels, are there sci-fi novels that
Oh,
really like, influenced your thinking? Because a lot of sci-fi is like really good, not just entertainment, like it's really
yeah.
thought-provoking.
The novels wise, I really love the Lord of the Rings
Yeah,
trilogy, and I love that. And then Jonathan Strange. Jonathan Strange is one of my favorite books.
I've never read it.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's about these two magicians, and it takes place in England during the Napoleonic era, and it's written as if this really happened in history,
Hmm.
right? So you get done reading it and you feel like this actually happened, which was really pretty cool.
That's
That's so
Susanna
that's
Clark.
that's
Is that
really
who wrote that?
Susanna Clark, yeah, wrote
I
that.
read
Yeah.
I read Piranesi by her. Have you read that?
Oh, Piranesi was cool. I like that too. Yeah, I love that.
It's beautiful.
But Jonathan Strange is my favorite. So
Okay.
but sci-fi wise, I think it's Star Trek the original series for me, and Star Wars.
So like
A
a
New
hard
A New Hope is my favorite of the movies. I know that other people will object,
there's
but
plenty of arguments
it's a
for it.
fairy tale. It was the first one. It had all of those things going for it. It's
Agreed. Yeah, it's the first one has such it introduces you to such an interesting world.
such a magical qualities to it. Yeah.
I feel that way about Dune. I don't know if you've read the
Oh, well, and then I haven't read Dune, and I would like to,
same.
especially now after seeing these two new movies. Dune 2, the last movie that just came out, I feel that I watching it felt that it was as transformational as Star Wars: A New Hope was in 1977.
Yeah, I
I just
guarantee
had
you.
that feeling watching this. I thought this is going to change everything again. I don't know exactly how, but this is like seeing Star Wars in the theater.
I mean, the massiveness of the world and the technology that it has and the way it sort of infuses some sort of mysticism with this.
And the way the way it was filmed was so artistic, as on top of being sci-fi. You know, the scene where the Sardaukar are flying up the mountainside, it was
And they're just
gorgeous,
sort of
absolutely
gliding.
gorgeous.
Yeah,
They're
it's almost
just gliding up the
ballet.
mountainside. That was gorgeous. And then
The fight scenes that were filmed
the
in
fight
infrared.
scene in on the Harkonnen world was amazing, and that was filmed in ultraviolet, if I remember right.
Yeah, I thought it was
They
infrared.
filmed that in
Yeah,
ultraviolet, which is why it looks so different. I mean, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I agree. I remember I watched an interview with the director Denis Villeneuve, and he talked about how when he made the decision to film it that way, the cinematographer was like, "You, I mean, there's no fixing this if it's not good. We're going to film this, and then that's just what we're going to have. There's no way to like process it and make it look like normal, film."
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
You're spending
you're
this
right.
money, and if the studio doesn't like it, it's just what we're going to have to deal with. I agree. They're both fantastic films, but the novel, I think you would deeply appreciate. It's so thoughtful and sort of philosophically deep and almost like kind of a religious text in a way. I mean, it was written on. I don't know if you know Alan Watts, the sort of Eastern thinker who brought like, well, he was an American, but he brought sort of Zen to America in the '60s and was kind of a hippie teacher. But the novel Dune was written on his houseboat by Frank Herbert. He was living on Alan Watts' houseboat the entire time that he was writing it, which I didn't know until after I'd read the book, and I thought so many times like this is a very Alan Watts sort of like Eastern Zen kind of worldview that it expounds. But it's
That's really cool. Wow.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so the last question that I want to make a priority to ask everybody is, what books would you recommend to the audience who wants to understand this phenomenon or this subject in a deeper way? What books would you press into their hands, and what are you reading
Ooh,
next?
that's tough. I would recommend, of course, it depends on who I was talking to, I think. Because if I was talking to a scientist friend of mine, I probably would refer them to Paul Hill's book just to get them started, right? To ease them into it.
That's the Physics of UFOs book.
The physics, yeah, the physics business. But I think that you have to, and of course this is part of my evolution, you have to accept that there's other aspects to this that are really strange. And so I would recommend certainly something by Jacques Vallée
Mhm.
would be very important to read.
Passport to Magonia or
Passport to Magonia would be very good. I just finished reading the Invisible College
Mhm.
that he wrote, and I thought that was very nice too. That might be an easier one to start for somebody, you know. And I enjoyed Diana Pasulka's American Cosmic. That was very good. I haven't read her book Encounters yet. I've got this whole pile of reading material, and there's so much I want to read. And I'm also reading Whitley Strieber's Them.
oh, is it good? I've only read
Fascinating.
Communion.
I've not read Communion yet. I've got Communion, but I started out reading Them, and I'm fascinated by these. That the way he's handling it in this book is kind of nice because he's presenting letters that people have written to him about their encounters. And then, so that's one chapter. And then the following chapter is basically his analysis or his take on that letter,
Oh, interesting.
kind of summing it up from his perspective
It
and
sort of
his
alternates.
experiences.
So there's lots each
So
step.
they alternate, yeah. So it's a letter and then continues. So my computer just told me I'm running out of power, which is a little scary. I don't have it plugged in.
We're almost done.
So that I'm really enjoying, because some of these letters are very strange, and then he tries to sort through them and try to understand them. And that's helping me see his perspective as an experiencer, and other people's experiences. And I think that's important. I mean, some of these people have encountered these things close up, and they have information to convey and expertise. And it's difficult to sort through as a scientist because some of it's very weird, but I think it's important to do so.
It at least gives you some context for understanding all of the other the other ways that people see this as a really significant phenomenon, right? Not everybody sees it as significant just because there's some exotic propulsion technology involved. It's significant and much deeper.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things going on. And this is the human aspect of it. The what happens when humans encounter these things, and that's important too.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gotten through the gauntlet of all the questions that I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much for staying on
This
for
has been
two
great
hours.
fun. Great fun. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
Thank
had a
you so
great
much
one
for
too.
having me.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it again. I could do a whole conversation with you just about Star Trek and sci-fi, I
That
think.
would be great fun too.
Kevin Knuth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right.